We're going to be reading from Numbers chapter 13 most of the time, starting in Numbers chapter 13 and then get over into Joshua as we go along. Before we get to that, I kind of want to go into the background of the Israelites wandering in the wilderness before they get to the Promised Land, because I think it plays into or has a lot to do with what went on when they get to the Promised Land. Mainly talking about Joshua and Caleb and the 12 spies, and then their entry into the Promised Land and the fall of Jericho. Well, okay. So prior to our story that we're actually going to cover tonight, they were in Egypt. The Israelites were in Egypt for over 400 years. According to Exodus 14:40, I think it says 430 years, and this was prophesied back in Genesis chapter 15 that they would be there for over 400 years in Egypt. While in Egypt, they had experienced, or up to this point, they'd gone through the plagues, the death of the firstborn, the Passover, in which they were spared as long as they did what God told them to do. They had also traveled through the Red Sea, had experienced, God had separated the waters through Moses, had separated the waters and the destruction of the Egyptian army when they tried to follow them. They had also the pillar of fire, pillar of cloud during the day and fire at night as they traveled up to this point, so that God's presence was with them daily, constantly. They'd also been provided, miraculously provided water while they're in the desert. There's some more. I think up front here.
Front.
Yeah. Sorry, thought I had enough. They're coming around. So they had been, God had miraculously provided water for them while in the desert, twice. I think on this side we're short. Thank you, Johnny. They had had manna provided for them. And the quail, when they got tired of eating manna and complained about that, God provided the quail. Numbers chapter 11 and Exodus 16 tells us about this. They had been attacked by the Amalekites up to this point, and God had delivered from the Amalekites as long as Moses kept his arm raised. Remember that story. As long as Moses kept his arm up, then God gave them victory over the Amalekites. So there are numerous miracles and reminders that God was with them all of the time up to this point. But they still had problems, didn't they? We know the story of the golden calf. Moses went up on the mountain for 40 days to receive the law, and while he was gone, they made a golden calf to worship it. There's kind of pictures here of kind of what we're talking about. The Red Sea, you can see that, kind of small. Moses parting the Red Sea and the destruction of the Egyptian army. At this point, you can see people are smiling, look like they're having a good time. By the time we're in the wilderness down there in the bottom left, none of those people are smiling in this picture, so it doesn't look like they're having a good time. And the pillar of fire that followed them, like I mentioned, and the manna being provided to them in the wilderness as food. So God had provided for them, and constant reminder, that's kind of what I'm getting at, that God was always with them, and the miracles that he had done for them. Coming down to Numbers chapter 11, right before we get to the verse that we're going to start covering. In Numbers chapter 11, even Aaron and Miriam kind of spoke against Moses. God appeared in the pillar of cloud and spoke to them from the pillar of cloud, and Miriam was struck with leprosy and then healed. So even up to that point, we can see kind of a trend of them being disgruntled, them still not having enough trust in God, being unhappy, and had complained about wanting to go back to Egypt, which is kind of hard to understand. That they would want to go back to slavery that they'd been in when things got difficult. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. That's kind of the background leading up to this point. So we're on the edge. We've come all the way. It's not working. There we go. Okay. On the back side of your handout, if you have a handout, there's a map that I kind of provided showing the route from Egypt. And I like that because it kind of has the scripture, the verse attached to it, showing the route that they had taken, references. But they'd gone from Egypt up to down the Sinai Peninsula, then up through the desert of Paran. There is where they're come to the edge of Canaan, the edge of the Promised Land. You kind of see the route it took. It took them 2 years and about 3 months to get to that point, to get from Egypt to the border of Canaan. According to Numbers chapter 1:1, Numbers chapter 11:1, a little over 2 years to get there. Now that distance from Egypt to Canaan is 5,200 miles, almost 5,300 miles, which I did some research looking up, and you could walk that. If you walked for 6 hours a day, you could walk that in about 3 weeks, give or take. So that kind of brings up the question, if you could cover that in much less distance, why did it take them over 2 years to get there? Any thoughts? What do y'all think? What are some possible reasons it took them that long to get to the Promised Land? God promised them the Promised Land. He told them He was taking them there. Why would it have taken them that long to get there?
Lack of faith, doubt,
Okay.
fear, murmuring, complaining about what God is doing.
Right. Obviously, had seen that already. They didn't have trust in God, doubt. We're kind of given a clue in find it. Exodus chapter 13, 17, and 18. If we look at that passage, Exodus 13, 17, and 18, kind of get a glimpse on why God didn't take them directly to the Promised Land. And it plays into what Billy was saying there. Just a lack of trust. They weren't ready. And I've got that wrong passage written down. I have to go back and look for it. He mentions in Exodus, I wrote the wrong verse down, I apologize, that he said that they were afraid that they would be attacked, and the fact that they were attacked at war would make them want to go back to Egypt, is the reason that's given there. So he was worried that if they came to adversity, if they were attacked by someone, another country or whatever, while they're getting there, that they would immediately want to go back to Egypt. So God knew that they weren't quite ready. So they didn't have the trust that they needed in Him, would be probably a good reason for why it took them so long, why He made them travel or wander. Also, we know during this time that the law was given to Moses on Mount Sinai. So before they entered the Promised Land, God gave the law to Moses, which he was on the mount for 40 days and 40 nights. So there are some things that needed to be in place, or God felt like they needed to have before they were ready to enter the Promised Land. They just weren't ready, besides the fact that they had a lack of trust in Him. What do you think, just kind of throwing it out there, what effect do you think that had on them, the nation of Israel being in captivity, being slaves for 400 years? What does that do to people when they are enslaved? It makes you, well, right. Right. They had become reliant, because repeatedly, every time things got difficult, their answer was, well, let's go back to Egypt. It's hard for us to imagine that you'd want to go back to slavery, but that's what they knew. They didn't have confidence in their own abilities, they didn't have trust in God, so they had developed that reliance on even their captors to provide things for them, and just a lack of trust, lack of confidence on their part. It seems to be. Right. Lack of ambition, lack of their goal, what they're trying to get to.
Kind of like when you see people that are incarcerated for a long time, they almost would rather go back to prison because they know that system. I mean, you can probably speak to that better than anybody else.
Yeah. Yeah, and you'll see people that we say are institutionalized. If you ever, watch Shawshank Redemption, that movie, that's what, Brooks and some of those people, they've been in prison for so long that that's all they know. They don't know how to function on the outside. So I'm sure there was some, being slaves for 400 years, that they had lack of confidence, lack of, they knew, even as bad as slavery was, they knew it. They knew what to expect. They knew what their day-to-day was going to be with it. It was the fear of the unknown, and sometimes that affects even us too. But incarceration or domestic abusive relationships, you see it. People are afraid to leave because they at least know that. But regardless, we see that they had a whole lot of lack of trust, lack of confidence, lack of focus on what their goal was, lack of trust in God.
Well, Kirk, they weren't used to being responsible for making decisions for their own accountability. They just did what they were told for all these years.
Right.
What they had to. And so it's the routine and just thinking about their lives. They were told what to do, when to do it, how to do it,
Yeah, and you could, if
They become accountable for decisions to do whatever they had to do for that day.
right, used to the routine.
Yeah, they're too reliant on themselves to sit up on God, what God will do for them.
True.
There's a promise stated, and yet they're not stepping out on faith because they have a lack of faith.
Right. Trusting in their own abilities. And we're not going to read through the passage, but frequently the idea is brought up that they, just weak-minded, that even Moses asked for God for help towards the end there, because he was just overwhelmed. Moses was overwhelmed with trying to, you get the idea, it's like herding cats, just wandering through the wilderness. Everything was on him to lead them, give them direction. When they ran out of water, he was the guy they went to fix all their problems. So just no self-reliance. So that kind of brings us up to where we're at with the story of the spies. Is the nation of Israel generally had this lack of trust in God, lack of fear, doubt, and all those things that they hadn't got a grip on, obviously. So let's look at Exodus. Well, again, that's the wrong. I'll have to look that up verse later. Let's go ahead and look at Numbers chapter 13. We mentioned Numbers chapter 12, Miriam and Aaron had spoke out against Moses, and Miriam had been struck with leprosy and healed. That brings us to Numbers chapter 13, where our story kind of takes place. The story of Joshua, Caleb, and the spies. They've come to the edge of Canaan. Took them, like I said, 2 years to get here. They're ready to enter the promised land that God gave them. And let's take a look at that and see what happens, starting in Numbers chapter 13. Starting at verse 1. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Send out for yourself men, so that they may spy out the land of Canaan, which I am going to give to the sons of Israel. You shall send a man from each of their fathers' tribes, every one a leader among them. So Moses sent them from the wilderness of Paran at the command of the Lord, and all the men who were heads of the sons of Israel. These are the names from the tribe of Reuben, Shemua, and I'm going to butcher these, but the son of Zakur. From the tribe of Simeon, Shaphat, the son of Hori. From the tribe of Judah, Caleb, the son of Jephunneh. From the tribe of Issachar, Igal, the son of Joseph. From the tribe of Ephraim, Hoshea, the son of Nun. From the tribe of Benjamin, Palti, the son of Raphu. From the tribe of Zebulun, Gadiel, the son of Sodi. From the tribe of Joseph. From the tribe of Manasseh, Kadi, the son of Susi. From the tribe of Dan, Amiel, the son of Gamali. From the tribe of Asher, Sethur, the son of Michael. From the tribe of Naphtali, Nabai, the son of Vophsi. From the tribe of Gad, Geuel, the son of Machi. These are the names of the men whom Moses sent to spy out the land. But Moses called Hoshea, the son of Nun, Joshua, so he renamed him. Hoshea means salvation, whereas Joshua means the Lord is salvation, or salvation comes from the Lord. In other places in the Bible, it mentions that Joshua was a servant to Moses. So I wonder if he just got tired of hollering for salvation every time he wanted hell, and just change it to the Lord is salvation, to give glory to the Lord. But that's the difference in his name change there. Verse 17, when Moses sent them to spy out the land of Canaan, he said to them, go up there into the Negev, then go up into the hill country, see what the land is like, and whether the people who live in it are strong or weak, whether they are few or many. How is the land in which they live? Is it good or bad? And how are the cities in which they live? Are they open camps or in fortifications? How is the land? Is it fat or lean? Are there trees in it or not? Make an effort then to get some of the fruit of the land, Now the time was for the time of the first ripe grapes. So they went up, spied out the land from the wilderness of Zin as far as Rehob at Lebo-Hamath. When they had gone up into the Negev, they came to Hebron, where Ahiman, Shishai, and Tamal, the descendants of Anak, were. Now Hebron was built 7 years before Zoan in Egypt. Then they came to the valley of Eshcol, and from there cut down a branch with a single cluster of grapes, and they carried on a pole between two men, with some of the pomegranates and the figs. That place was called the Valley of Eshcol because of the cluster which the sons of Israel had cut down from there. So that brings us to, I should have had somebody else read those names. That was rough. So they chose, first one I'll make, they chose, who were the spies that were chosen? There were leaders from each tribe, whether they're people of influence or people they looked up to or people that should have had some persuasive or that they recognized as leaders of their tribe. They weren't just someone, a layperson. They were actually people that were considered, like I said, leaders and had some influence, which I think is going to play a part in what happens later on. So we know it had taken them 20 years or 2 years to get here, bringing them at this point. If we read in Deuteronomy, the account there gives us the idea that the people had gone to Moses and asked for spies, and God had approved this. So here it says God told them to send spies into the country. There, Moses is talking, and he said that the people had asked to send spies, which would kind of make sense or fit with the fact that they were, wanted to know a little bit more information, just lack of confidence. So they chose these spies from the leaders of each tribe. Do we remember the names of the other 10 spies? We know Joshua and Caleb, but we tend to forget the other 10. And we'll see why here in a minute. So the spies come back. We read where the guys brought the cluster of grapes back on a pole, and then the argument breaks out. We're going to read here in a little bit about what they're going to do with the information they have. I don't know who took this picture, but it had to be a really old roll of film to get that back then. But the spies come out, and that's when things go south. So we have, here we have Moses' instructions. He told them what route to take, to find out if the inhabitants were strong, weak, few, or many, whether the land was good or bad, whether the towns were fortified or not, and what the soil was like, whether there were trees, and told them to bring back fruit. So starting back up in verse 25, chapter 13, there we get the spies report. So this is what Moses told them to do. Let's see if they do what Moses asked them to do. See what the report says. So when they returned from spying out the land at the end of 40 days, they proceeded to come to Moses and Aaron to the congregation of the sons of Israel in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. And they brought back word to them and to all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. Thus they told them and said, we went into the land where you sent us, and it certainly does flow with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. Nevertheless, my version says but there's always a but, isn't there? Nevertheless, the people who live in the land are strong, and the cities are fortified and very large. And moreover, we saw the descendants of Anak there. If you look back in history, the descendants of Anak, they're talking about people who are very large later when they go in to take the land. There are giants. They describe them as giants of the land, kind of like Goliath. So from that group of people, very large people. Amalek is living in the land of the Negev, and the Hittites and the Jebusites and the Amorites are living in the hill country, and the Canaanites are living by the sea and by the side of Jordan. Then Caleb silenced the people before Moses and said, "We should by all means go up and take possession of it, for we will surely overcome it." But the men who had gone up with him said, "We are not able to go against the people, for they are too strong for us." So we have the dissension there. They're beginning to argue. Joshua is for it, and we'll see here in a little bit Caleb interrupts. So they give out to the sons of Israel bad report of the land which they had spied out, saying, "The land through which we have gone and spying out is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people whom we saw are men of great size. We also saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak there, and we have become like grasshoppers in our own sight, and so we were in their sight." So they're describing these people of large stature or large size, and they say, we see ourselves as grasshoppers, and that's how they see us. So again, the doubt, they doubt their abilities, they're worried. And when they're saying they don't think they can take the land, what are they relying on? What are they basing that on?
Themselves.
Their own feelings, their own, what they perceive, and they've forgotten all these things that God has done for them. They're seeing their limitations.
Kirk, it's interesting that God's telling them what to do. If you look at the diagram up here on the left, what he told them to do, check out the land, the towns, sales of fruit and all that stuff. He didn't mention anything about the people. But yet the people come back and realize these people are bigger than we are, they're stronger than we are, oh, you have little faith. But God told Moses, I'm going to give you the promised land. Send out members from 12 tribes here and go check it out. And they shouldn't have worried about the Amalekites, whoever they are, the giants' land or whatever, because God's already told them they're going to give you the land.
Right.
But yet, they went against the two and deferred the other people, discouraged the other people from going.
Right.
As you'll find out there.
Right, and like we mentioned, these were people, they were leaders, people of influence. What should they have been doing? They should have been influencing to say, God's been with us up to this point. Let's go. And they, like you mentioned, they were commanded. God commanded them to go into the land. It was a command by God. Found a good handout that I thought was good. It brought up the mention, what did the spies do wrong? I get too far ahead of myself. So what did the spies do wrong? They were affected by the people's attitude. When we get in here in a little bit, we'll talk about the people became scared and wept, verse 14 and 1. But their report scared and demoralized the people. I'll get organized here eventually. They doubted God's power, which we've already mentioned. Even with all the miracles they had seen and what God had done for them, they doubted what God could do for them and his power. They didn't do a thorough job. If we look at Moses' instructions on what to do compared to what they did, they didn't do what Moses asked them to do, did they? So they had already fallen down on the job, didn't do a thorough job. We talked about the fact that they were former slaves, probably made them fearful of their limit. They saw their limitations and what they could and couldn't do instead of what God could do for them. And probably due to that also, we talked a little bit about, it probably would have been easier in a lot of ways just stay in the desert. God gave them everything they wanted. They relied on God. As long as they stayed in the desert, they weren't having to do much fighting with anybody or interacting with anybody. And here they're going to a land that's full of people, full of strange tribes and everything else, like their report mentioned. So you wonder if there was some thought in their mind of, we don't want to go deal with that. We're not prepared to deal with that. Larry, Jeff. Right. They saw the negative and what they didn't have. So they went beyond there. They did more than just what Moses told them to do. When we read here, they went among the people spreading a bad report. Was that what they're supposed to do? Is that what they were supposed to come back and give a report of what the land held? But they went and actually spread a bad report among the people and got them stirred up to feel like they couldn't do what God asked them to do, take the land. They doubted God's power.
They went back to Moses and told him all the positive things about the land. The fruit's great, the trees, the water, and all that stuff. And encouraged one another through Moses. And Moses saying, "We can do this. God has given it to us in our hands." then they'd had faith to go and go do it. But when they murmured and grumbled against Moses and what God said, wanted to die, instead go back to slavery.
Right.
So there's a whole lot of lack of faith here after everything he's done for them.
Right. After everything they'd seen, like we mentioned, all the miracles, had been with them day and night, the pillar of fire and pillar of cloud during the day, he was there constantly. And they still doubted his ability to take care of them, or what he could do.
I'm thinking, because these 12 were selected, they were recognized as leaders of different tribes. But after their trip, when they came back, they didn't show any spiritual leadership. They looked at only the physical nature, and like you've been saying, not what God could do for them, but they didn't show spiritual leadership.
All right. So what kept them out of the promised land? Like we mentioned, the doubt, lack of trust in God. They saw their limitations instead of seeing what God could do for them. Let me continue with reading here, starting at chapter 14, verse 1. So they came back, gave a bad report. Verse 1 starts, then all the congregation lifted up their voices and cried, and the people wept that night. All the sons of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron, and the whole congregation said to them, what would that we have died in the land of Egypt, or that we had died in this wilderness? Why is the Lord bringing us into this land to fall by the sword? Our wives and our little ones will become plunder, and it would not be better for us to turn to Egypt. Read it the right way there. So they're already seeing the worst case scenario. We're going to go in there, we're going to get slaughtered, our family's going to get killed. So the worst case scenario kind of thing going on here. So they said to one another, let us appoint a leader and return to Egypt. Now they've gone over from just complaining and grumbling to, what are they doing now? Let's pick another leader. They're rebelling. They're rebelling against God and against his chosen leader, Moses. Then Moses and Aaron fell down on their faces in the presence of all the assembly of the congregation of the sons of Israel, Joshua the son of Nun, and Caleb, son of Jephunneh, of those who had spied out the land, and tore their clothes. And they spoke to all the congregation of the sons of Israel, saying, the land which we passed through to spy out is an exceedingly good land, described as a land of milk and honey, right? If the Lord is pleased with us, then he will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land which flows with milk and honey. There you go. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not fear the people of the land, for they will be our prey. Their protection has been removed from them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear them. But all the congregation said to stone them with stones. Then the glory of the Lord appeared in the tent of meeting to all the sons of Israel. So not only are they grumbling, complaining, and wanting to go back to Israel, they've gone over to rebellion now and even wanting to kill Joshua and Caleb, who are trying to, give a good report. So besides just reading an account of this, how does that apply to us? The slide I've got up there is, how do we get it wrong? How do we get distracted and fail to reach our goals, or to accomplish what we should accomplish? What prevents us from doing what our purpose, or what we're here to do for God?
Our attitude can keep us from doing it.
Okay. A lot of the things we're talking about with them is kind of, we're making the application. Doubt. What causes us to doubt sometimes?
Fear.
Okay. That's the root emotion is fear of the unknown. It's difficult to talk to somebody. It's difficult to be the sole voice of what's right, and when there's other people that are, aren't Christians, aren't speaking.
The reason here, they're going to stone Caleb and Joshua for what they're trying to tell them. We can do this, a land flowing with milk and honey. I mean, why wouldn't anybody want to go there?
All right. Yeah, and God's taking care of us. God's for us. He's told us to do it. He is with us. And of course, a strong lesson there. If God's with us, if we're doing what God wants us to do, can we fail? We might.
We might fall or doubt, but he'll pick us up and lead us on our way if we
Right.
stay faithful. That's our strength. It's like the everyday Christian life now. Walking through this world, trying to get to heaven, we got to realize every day we've been attacked by Satan and his darts and stuff like that, and trying our faith and tempting us, and yet to be faithful, We need to pray to God, rely on God, and walk as God would have us to do.
Then we're doing what he wants to do. We're a success.
It seems to me that as humans, we tend to focus on the negative rather than the positive. They forgot God had already delivered them in battle, in different places, the Amalekites.
Right.
They went in there thinking, well, yeah, but, these guys are bigger, and, I don't think we can whip them. But they forgot that God was helping them all along the way. And we tend to, I think, today do that just as well. We remember our failures and don't value the successes that God has given us.
Right. Good point. And one thing I think they missed out on here too is where does our worth come from? Where does our value or our terms of success come from for us? It comes from God. And like I said, we tend to see ourselves from a human standpoint. I can't do that. I'm not good at that. I'm going to fail. The negative mindset affects us from taking action. Somebody over here miss somebody?
It's okay to fail. But as humans, we have to realize that it's okay to fail.
As long as you keep trying.
As long as you keep trying.
I got an observation. Yeah, I think sometimes we don't really get it wrong intentionally, but there are so many distractions. If I look at why am I a Christian, why is that part of my life? To me, the great focus seems to be what's the reward at the end. And if I lose out anywhere in the middle of that, then boy, I've really lost something important to me. But so many times people have that goal. I think they'd like to make it to the end to be saved, but there's so many distractions. I got to go work, or I got to go do this, or I haven't got time for that. Or we got to go fishing, or we got to go vacation. We just let so many things distract us from what we're really trying to do. And if I'm going to try to be a Christian, that means, you mean I'm going to go to church every Sunday morning, go to Bible class, Wednesday night? You mean that's what I'm going to be required of me? Man, that takes a lot of my time, and I don't know if I can do that or not. So you get the wrong assessment of the real value of what the target is. And so there's so many things to distract you from that.
Right.
And I think a lot of people do that. I think all of us, we're trying, of course.
Oh,
If you don't try, you
right.
fail. If you do try, well, maybe you can make it okay,
It's a daily struggle. Even, like I said, you can even have every intention and put a lot of effort into studying God's Word every day to make it a better part of your life. And before you know it, the busyness of life, you look around and like, well, I'm taking care of all these things, and you lose sight of it. You lose sight of what your goal you're trying to get to, just the distractions of life around us.
God tells us to take up our cross and follow Him daily. This is not a light thing to do.
Right.
It's a battle, and we know it's a battle.
Definitely. Paul?
I think if we're trying to walk in the light, we're trying to make the right decision, if you put forth the effort, I think if we just took a little bit less credit for the outcome, it might be a little bit easier to just walk by faith. So don't take all the credit when you succeed, because probably God opened a lot of those doors, permitted you to succeed. And the flip side, don't take all the credit when you fail. Maybe that was an answer He was giving you, saying, no, that's not what I want from you. I shut that door. You didn't necessarily fail. You just didn't allow that to happen. If you're walking by faith, then you will open the door that He wants open. So
Right.
don't take credit for everything.
Right. And, sometimes we're not prepared for, God does things to prepare. What I'm getting at is, what does difficulties, trials, and hard times in life do for us? What does it create in us? Faith makes us realize that, okay, I can't do this alone. I need help. More trust in God. So it builds that patience. It builds confidence in God instead of our own ability to get through it.
Even endurance,
Right.
I think it's faith with knowledge. It's not just a blind faith, but you get to reading what the book tells us. There's a lot of support to helping us in our faith. So to me, it's faith, but I really need the knowledge that supports that faith. That's the way I look at it.
Right. To keep us on track, make sure we're going in the right direction. So we mentioned distractions. What kind of want to get in a little bit, we talked about a little bit, distractions that keep us from living every day how we want to live. Paul talks about that, the flesh warring against a spiritual man within himself. And I kind of broken this into external distractions and internal distractions. What kind of internal distractions keep us from accomplishing our goals, staying true to God, or living like we want to live? What kind of internal things we face? Doubt. Like I mentioned now, doubt, lack of confidence. Fear, right. Fear is the basis of doubt. Maybe laziness. Sometimes we get tired and lose sight of it. External distractions, and that sometimes that takes a lot of effort to control those. You usually have a plan to sit down and have a devotion. Maybe you do a devotional every morning, read your Bible. If you don't eliminate distractions, before you know it, you're not going to accomplish anything, because the TV's going, or the news, probably your phone rings, and
time is an external distraction, because there's so much time in a day, and yet if we misuse it, then we're not able to accomplish what we need to do. So therefore, our own time being pulled here, there, and everywhere can actually distract us from God.
Right. I'm convinced that's one of Satan's greatest tools, is all the stuff life throws at you, that if we don't control those things, before we know it, we're really busy, but we're not really accomplishing anything.
One of the biggest distractions that I've seen is what we see on TV. I mean, we hardly ever watch anything except travel shows, the news. Sometimes the news is not so good. But you see so many. If you look at science programs on TV, they're going to always be saying that evolution is fact.
Right.
And so if you've really got to be looking at the evidences of why. Why do I believe in God? Why do I believe in the Bible? And those can be substantially supported. You don't have to just let that blow away and say, well, I'm not sure about it anymore. Just look. Knowledge is so important and helps you, but you got to put the effort into it.
All right. Yeah, it takes effort. What does God say? He rewards those who diligently seek Him. There's some diligence there. It doesn't just come to us. We have to work at it. So it's an effort to not let ourselves get distracted, either internal or, we can see where the Israelites here were distracted by internal things, doubt, lack of confidence and trust in God. They let a lot of things, even when God brought them to the edge of the promised land and told them, I'm with you, go take the land. They had a lot of internal things that kept them from getting there, didn't they? Lack of faith, all these things we're talking about. So it's a struggle. Takes constant effort on our part to get there.
We can only be courageous if we trust in God. If you can't trust in God, there is no courage there.
Right.
So if we were to see all these miracles like the Israelis did, the Israelites, and then they so quickly forgot, very short.
All right.
If we were to see these, how quickly would we forget?
Yeah.
Same nature.
Right. Yeah, you like to think read through the Bible, read about people that saw miracles and all the things that happened. Like, well, if I was there, if I saw that, I wouldn't have any doubt at all. But we tend to we have a short-term memory problem. That's just a human side of us, I think, is to focus on the negative and focus on the I can't sometimes. The Israelites definitely had a problem with that. The negative thought, defeatism attitude that they had, that we can't do this, we can't accomplish this, it's too much for us, the people are giants. They were full of seeing the negative in everything, and that creates doubt. It keeps them from being within, having the trust in God that we need to have. I ran across this handout I thought was pretty good. I started reading it, and it's 7 steps to overcoming doubt, some psychology advice, which there's plenty of that out there. But this one, I liked it, kind of tied it into God's Word, Scripture that bases up the 7 steps for overcoming doubt or fear. Identify what you're afraid of. And we're told to identify or recognize our stumbling blocks. Identify what you're afraid of. Will help you overcome this. Just knowing what you're facing and identifying it. Practice or seek out the uncomfortable. If you know you try to avoid things, or you know things that make you uncomfortable, practice facing that a little bit at a time. take prayer with you, but do the uncomfortable. Do what you face, and you'll slowly overcome that fear of it. Take action. Hesitating or spending your time in doubt or second-guessing yourself just increases your doubt. It doesn't. If we're going to accomplish anything, we have to take action. If you take the time sometimes to sit back and analyze something too much, you're more likely not to do it. You ever experience that? Sometimes it's just best to just jump in and do it. Whether it works or fails or you have to try 15 times, but take action. To face something and not take action, to worry about it, stew, it just builds anxiety. So their advice is just take action. We're told this, James 1, chapter 22, we're told to do. Colossians 3:12, set your minds on things above, Number 5, it's talking about recognize or acknowledge your success. When we do things, like we just brought up, when we do things that are right, acknowledge that. Say, hey, I did a pretty good job today. I spoke to that person, or I stood up, at work when this topic came up, or something like that. Recognize when we are doing the right thing, and take credit or acknowledge that, and give thanks to God for giving us the strength to do that. But visualize and recognize our successes. Be realistic. Sometimes, and you can see the Israelites definitely did this here, we're quick to jump into the worst case scenario. Well, I can never do that. That's, and we talk about all the ways things could go wrong. How many times does a worst case scenario really happen? Usually it's not near as bad as we think it is when we finally get into it. I heard somebody say one time, the worst things I worried about in my life never happened, and the bad things that happened I never saw coming. So sometimes we can spend too much time thinking worst case scenario when it's usually not that bad. That's not going to happen. And number 7 they have here is ask for help, which we know if we take God with us, we have the active prayer life. We're engaged in talking to God and reading from His Word and what He wants us to do. If we have His help, we're going to be stronger, aren't we? We're going to be more likely to accomplish things. So, let's take a break. We've been going for about 30 minutes. I think we'll have some refreshments back there. And I think they give us about a 20-minute break to kind of fellowship, and then we'll meet back in here and finish up the fall of Jericho. We're going to be, when we get kicked off here in a minute, starting with Joshua chapter 1. Of course, the spies came back with their report. They got the people stirred up, rebellion. They started rebelling against and talking about stoning Joshua and Caleb and choosing a new leader and going back to Egypt. So God punished them, as we know, with another 40 years of wandering in the wilderness. So everyone that was of that generation, and especially the 10 spies that gave the bad report, did not make it into the promised land. But all the fighting men of that generation, we're told, did not get to go into the promised land except for Joshua and Caleb. They're the only 2 of that generation that made it in after the 40 years of wandering in the wilderness. So after the 40 years, we come back to Joshua chapter 1. Moses has died, and Joshua has been appointed to be the leader of the Israelites. Yeah, I've got nothing up here.
Kurt, it's important to remember how many people were there. One time, Moses was talking to God, he said, I'm a man of over 600,000 people.
Right.
We're talking about this generation of 600,000
Right.
people that are not going to go into the promised land. Only 2.
Right. The whole amount of their fighting men, their force, you would say. That's a lot of people to not make it in when they were so close, just for the wrong attitude. Well, let's go on with our reading, and then maybe by then we'll get it pulled back up. We're going to start in Joshua chapter 1, and if I can get some help reading, I don't want to read the whole thing, but to get the story, we're going to kind of jump around from chapter 1 to chapter 2, and then chapter 5 and 6 with the fall of Jericho. Cover all that, then maybe by then I'll have I think I've just got 2 or 3 slides left. Starting Joshua chapter 1, we're going to read verse 1 down through verse 11. And if anybody wants to start that out and read 5 or 6 verses, then we'll let somebody take over. Joshua chapter 1:1, please.
1 to 11.
Yeah, verse 1 through verse 11. If you don't want to read the whole thing, then we'll switch off.
After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord, it came to pass that the Lord spoke to Joshua the son of Nun, Moses' assistant, saying, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now therefore arise, go over this Jordan, you and all this people, to the land which I am giving to them, the children of Israel. Every place that the sole of your foot will tread upon, I have given you, as I said to Moses. From the wilderness and this Lebanon as far as the great river, the river Euphrates, all the land of the Hittites, and to the great sea toward the going down of the sun shall be your territory. No man shall be able to stand before you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will not leave you nor forsake you. Be strong and of good courage, for to this people you shall divide as an inheritance the land which I swore to their fathers to give them. Only be strong and very courageous, that you may observe to do according to all the law which Moses my servant commanded you. Do not turn from it to the right hand or to the left, that you may prosper wherever you go. This book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate in it day and night, that you may observe to do according to all that is written in it. For then you will make your way prosperous, and then you will have good success. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and of good courage. Do not be afraid nor be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. Then Joshua commanded the officers of the people, saying, Pass through the camp and command the people, saying, Prepare provisions for yourselves, for within 3 days you will cross over this Jordan, to go in to possess the land which the Lord your God is giving you to possess.
Okay, thank you. We're keeping a running tally of be strong and courageous, how many times he tells him that. So we get our theme. Okay, jumping down to verse 16. And we'll read starting verse 16 all the way through chapter 2, verse 16. Anyone want to start off reading a few and we'll switch off? Bonnie, you want to? Thank you.
They answered Joshua, We will do whatever you command us, and we will go wherever you send us. We will obey you just as we obeyed Moses, and may the Lord your God be with you as he was with Moses. Anyone who rebels against your orders and does not obey your words, and everything you command will be put to death. So be strong and courageous. Then Joshua secretly sent out 2 spies from the Israelite camp at Acacia Grove. He instructed them, scout out the land on the other side of the Jordan River, especially around Jericho. So the 2 men set out and came to the house of a prostitute named Rahab and stayed there that night. But someone told the king of Jericho, Some Israelites have come here tonight to spy out the land. So the king of Jericho sent orders to Rahab, Bring out the men who have come into your house, for they have come here to spy out the whole land. Rahab had hidden the 2 men, but she replied, Yes, the men were here earlier, but I didn't know where they were from. They left the town at dusk, as the gates were about to close. I don't know where they went. If you hurry, you can probably catch up with them. Actually, she had taken them up to the roof and hidden them beneath bundles of flax she had laid out. So the king's men went looking for the spies along the road leading to the shallow crossings of the Jordan River. And as soon as the king's men had left, the gate of Jericho was shut.
Okay,
Keep going.
thank you. That's a lot. I appreciate it. Mr. Maxwell, you want to take over there, verse 8? Thank you.
Now before they lay down, she came up to them on the roof and said to the men, I know that the Lord has given you the land, and that the terror of you has fallen on us, and that all the inhabitants of the land have melted away before you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the 2 kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, Sihon and Og, whom you utterly destroyed. When we heard it, our hearts melted, and no courage remained in any man any longer because of you. For the Lord your God, he is God in heaven above and on earth beneath. Do you want to go further?
Down to 16, if you would, verse 16.
Now therefore, please swear to me by the Lord, since I have dealt kindly with you, that you also will deal kindly with my father's household, and give me a pledge of truth, and spare my father and my mother and my brothers and my sisters, with all who belong to them, and deliver our lives from death. So the men said to her, our life for yours, do not tell this business of ours, and it shall come about when the Lord gives us the land, that we will deal kindly and faithfully with you. Then she let them down by a rope through the window, for her house was on the city wall, so that she was living on the wall. She said to them, go to the hill country, so that the pursuers will not happen upon you, and hide yourselves there for 3 days until the pursuers return. Then afterward you may go on your way.
Okay, thank you all. It's interesting there, when Rahab's talking to him, the people of the land had heard about the crossing of the Red Sea and all that, hadn't they? They were aware of all that. And like she says, they knew that God had given them the land. Do you think they knew that the first time they had been there? The passage we read earlier, when the spies had come into the land? People of the land are probably aware of that then, weren't they? They knew about them crossing the Red Sea and all the things that God had done for them. So they had, at that time, had more faith than the people of Israel did, you could say. So what did Rahab do based on the faith or the knowledge that she had?
She hid the two men to save their lives.
Yeah, she wasn't even an Israelite, but she knew that God was with them and had a belief that God was going to give the land to them. So she acted on her faith. And as we know, I'm not going to read the whole amount for the time we have we have. But she was saved, wasn't she? Based on her faith and based on what she did for the spies, she was saved by her act of faith.
Not only her, but her father and her mother and kinsmen.
Right.
Her brothers and sisters and all, her whole family.
Saved her whole family. Another interesting note is how many women are mentioned in the lineage of Jesus in Matthew. 4 of them, and she's one of them. Rahab was mentioned in the lineage of Jesus. So how many times in chapter 1 did we have the term strong and courageous? Anybody keep a track? I got 4. 3 times God said it to Joshua, and then once the people said it back to him, didn't they? They said, we'll follow you and follow your command, do what you say, but be strong and courageous. That term, or a version of it, used throughout the whole Old Testament, used quite a bit actually. It's a common exhortation and encouragement to be strong and be courageous. Can you think of any verses in the New Testament? I've written a couple down, but Ephesians 6:10 says, be strong in the Lord. Philippians 4:13, I could do all things through Christ that strengthens me. Things like that. They're kind of give the same idea that we're to be strong, courageous, and have our confidence in the Lord. That brings us up to Jericho, the spot. How many spies did they send in this time compared to last time? It's kind of interesting to me too. We went from 12 down to 2 this time. We're going to take as much of a chance of there being so much dissension maybe. But he sent 2 spies in this time. Hard to see on that map there, but the crossing where they'll cross the Jordan, we're not going to read that tonight, where they cross the Jordan is just north of the Dead Sea there. This map's not very big, hard to see, but north side of the Dead Sea, they'll cross the Jordan and camp at Gilgal, and then attack Jericho. We're going to read about here in a little bit, the fall of Jericho, just on the north side of the Dead Sea, coming into the Promised Land. There is where we're looking at. I like maps. All right, let's, so already, what is different already this time than the last time they came up to the land of Canaan and getting ready to go in?
This time they said they listen to Joshua and do what he said. Before, it's kind of interesting, we will listen to you, when before they wouldn't listen to Moses, but this time they said they will.
Right. Instead of complaining about him, they give him their encouragement, and they actually encourage him. You know, be strong and courageous. God has given this, we're going to do this. So a totally different attitude they have this time. Obedient, encouraging, and showed their trust in God.
Well, these are the children of the ones that we failed.
Right.
They are gone, so the children learned a lesson.
Right. Obviously.
It's interesting, I think, that Joshua's come a long way from, they were going to stone him for telling the truth. And now he's telling the truth again, and they're going to follow him like they were supposed to in the first place.
Man of conviction. Okay, jumping over to chapter 5, we'll pick up in the interim between what we just read and chapter 5 here. They've crossed the Jordan miraculously again. God parted the waters. They passed through the Jordan on dry land as long as the priest stayed in the center. So they crossed the Jordan, come to chapter 5, starting at verse 13. And we're getting ready to, they're getting ready to take the city of Jericho. So start chapter 5, verse 13. Now it came about when Joshua was by Jericho that he lifted up his eyes, looked, and behold, a man was standing opposite him with his sword drawn in his hand. And Joshua went to him and said, "Are you for us or for our adversaries?" He said, "No, I indeed come now as a captain of the host of the Lord." And Joshua fell on his face to the earth and bowed down and said to him, "What has my Lord to say to his servant?" The captain of the Lord's host said to Joshua, "Remove your sandals from your feet, for the place where you're standing is holy." And Joshua did so. What does that remind us of? Moses, burning bush. Now Jericho was tightly shut because of the sons of Israel. No one went out and no one came in. So they got the city fortified, the walls and the gates are closed. Verse 2, the Lord said to Joshua, "See, I have given Jericho into your hand with its king and the valiant warriors. You shall march around the city, all the men of war circling the city once. You shall do so for 6 days. Also 7 priests shall carry 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark. Then on the 7th day you shall march around the city 7 times, and the priests shall blow the trumpets. It shall be that when they make a long blast with the ram's horns, and when you hear the sound of the trumpet, all the people shall shout with a great shout, and the wall of the city will fall down flat, and the people will go up every man straight ahead." So Joshua the son of Nun called the priest and said to them, "Take up the ark of the covenant, let 7 priests carry 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark of the Lord." And he said to the people, "Go forward, march around the city, and let the armed men go on before the ark of the Lord." And it was so that when Joshua had spoken to the people, the 7 priests carrying the 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the Lord went forward and blew the trumpets, and the ark of the covenant of the Lord followed them. The armed men went before the priest who blew the trumpets, and the rear guard came after the ark while they continued to blow the trumpets. But when Joshua commanded the people, saying, "You shall not shout, nor let your voice be heard, nor a word proceed out of your mouth until the day I tell you, shout, then you shall shout." So he had the ark of the Lord taken around the city, circling it once, and they came into the camp and spent the night in the camp. Now Joshua rose early in the morning, and the priests took up the ark of the Lord. The 7 priests carrying the 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark of the Lord went on continually and blew the trumpets, and the armed men went before them, and the rear guard came after the ark of the Lord while they continued to blow the trumpets. Thus the 2nd day they marched around the city once and returned to the camp. They did this for 6 days. Then on the 7th day they rose early at the dawn of the day and marched around the city in the same manner 7 times. Only on that day they marched around the city 7 times. At the 7th time, when the priest blew the trumpets, Joshua said to the people, "Shout, for the Lord has given you this city." So if we were to attack a city tactically, would this be the way that people would do it? Doesn't make any sense. And you wonder if the inhabitants, of course, the inhabitants, obviously they had heard of the Israelites and knew that God was with them, but they had to be, I would think, confused or wondering what was going on. They just every day for 6 days just circled the city and then went back to their camp. That had to be a little bit intimidating, but also confusing. You know, like, what's the plan here? What are they going to do? But the people had faith in God. You know, obviously to them, this wouldn't have tactically made sense, but they trusted in God. And they continued even to do what God told them to do, even though it didn't make any sense. That's how God has planned for us taking the city and to show them that he was with them.
Those inside the city were trusting in the fortified walls and the gates shut and everything. Nobody's going to get in because we have this place secured, locked up. And so they thought.
All right. Right. They had their trust in the exterior instead of with God. Okay, if we move, we're running out of time. If we move on to chapter 6, we know, we read there that when they marched around the city on the seventh day, marched around it 7 times, and it's interesting too that all the people took part, all the people shouted, so it wasn't just a certain number of soldiers went out. Other battles you read about, they selected fighting men and went out and attacked the city. In this one, everyone was involved, weren't they? All of the Israelites, everyone. After they marched around, everyone shouted, and the walls of the city fell flat. They moved into the city and took the city, and all of the plunder, gold, and everything else went into the treasury for the temple. So, and that way Jericho fell, and God let them take the city with the walls falling.
I always wondered how in the world the whole walls of the city fell down in the place where Rahab and her family
Stayed, yeah. It'd be interesting if archaeologists could find that, wouldn't it? Find a city that was collapsed except for one section of the wall that Rahab lived in, because we know she was spared since she had helped the spies. So what are our lessons with the time we have left? What are the lessons we get from this?
When I get out, sometimes it's best to keep your mouth shut. Well, they told him to march around us
All right.
7 times and don't say a word until he tells you to shout.
Not one person said, "Are we there yet?" Did they?
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be hard to do. That in itself shows a trust and obedience that they had that the first group didn't have. Any other ideas, applications for ourselves we get from this? God will provide a way when it doesn't seem possible. I would imagine, like I said, tactically and common sense, it wouldn't make sense to think that we're going to march around the city and it's just going to fall down. But with God, there's a way to accomplish the impossible, isn't there? God is with us day and night. Of course, they had the pillar the whole time they're traveling, the pillar of cloud and the pillar of fire as a reminder. God was always with them, just like he is with us. God fights on our behalf. If we're trying to do what he wants us to do, God's with us. He's going to help us accomplish the things that he has for us to accomplish, that he wants us to do. He is fighting for us. God provides for our needs. He always gives us the things that we need, doesn't he?
It's interesting too to me that they obeyed God and they utterly destroyed everything. Man and woman, donkey, animal, everything. And the walls fell down. They went forward. They didn't have to back up or go around. They just marched right on in and destroyed what God told them to destroy. And Rahab and her family was saved.
Right. You wonder why would God, the women, children, kids, all of the people, why they would need to be destroyed. But we see patterns you read about the Israelites. God had a pattern of, he told them not to let any wickedness survive. The people, they worshiped idols and things like that to show that he was the only God to worship. But that's a command he gave them, is to utterly destroy a lot of these nations that were living there, to eradicate idolatry and a lot of things that they professed or carried on. One thing that I drew out of this was, just that just a little doubt, a little sin took them a lot further away from God than they really thought it would, didn't it? They had in their mind, I think, that they thought they would rebel, they would speak out against Moses, and maybe that they would march back to Egypt. But it wound up costing them 40 years in the wilderness and a whole lot. It took them a lot further than they ever thought, that would, just not trusting in God. Also that, the way isn't easy. The way that the Israelites had, wandering in the wilderness for 40 years, and before that, wandering in the wilderness up to the Canaan the first time, wasn't easy. But it was worth it in the end. They were given the reward of the promised land by trusting in God.
As the descendants of those who died in the wilderness are now going into the promised land and said, we'll follow you, Joshua, like God says, they're looking back and seeing where their parents disobeyed and seeing the end results of that. So they're going to go forward in faith when they say, well, Joshua will follow you and do what God says do. When their parents were rebellion again, why are we doing this? And, we don't need to do that. And the land's too big for us. We can't conquer it. Lack of faith. But here, they're putting their faith in God and Joshua again and stepping forward and going and doing what he said.
Right. They learned from the past. And, the wandering in the wilderness, had to toughen them up, had to make them, they learned trust, reliance on God, that their predecessors hadn't. Anybody have any other thoughts on lessons or applications to us from things tonight for the kids come back in here? Steve?
Well, I was just thinking that the children of Israel took over Canaan with war, weapons. God judged the Ammonites, and because it was time to punishment, they hadn't turned from sin. God used this nation to defeat them. And then we have, in the New Testament, come along with Christ, and you had Rome, a very powerful nation of war, and it martyred Christians, persecuted Christians. In 400 years, you had Constantine became a Christian and became the king, and no weapons were used by Christians.
Yeah.
But the weapons of spiritual weapons that God wants us to use today, the Empire of Rome was taken over, but not by war.
Right. And the verse doesn't come to mind right now, but it talks about God chooses the weak things of this world to accomplish, the things that don't make any sense to us. Those, the weak, insignificant things of this world, God chooses to use for His purposes. The power is in Him and not our own abilities. One of the things I put down here at the bottom, lessons or applications, was that doubt can delay our growth or our progress. If we allow doubt to consume us or occupy our mind, focused on the negative, it will delay our growth in Christ. It will delay us accomplishing what God wants to accomplish in our lives. Thank y'all for your participation. Hopefully you got some thoughts and things out of the lesson tonight. Be strong and courageous. We'll continue some other lessons. I think tomorrow Shannon has Esther, story of Esther. Continue talking about be strong and courageous in the Lord. Trust in Him instead of ourselves. Thank y'all.
Thank you.